kolegos, viešojo sektoriaus atstovai, užsienio svečiai, partneriai. Šios dienos susitikimo proga tarptautinės iniciatyvos atviros vyriausybės partnerystės 10-metis. Todėl atvira vyriausybė šiandien kviečia jūs klausytis tarptautinės atviros vyriausybės partnerystės Open Government Partnership atstovo pristatymo apie šią iniciatyvą, Lietuvos Respublikos užsienio reikalų ministerijos atstovės pranešimo apie demokratiją ir jos šiandieninius iššūkius. Taip pat Argentinos atstovės, kuri pristatys savo šalies patirtis atviros vyriausybės partnerystėje. Toliau pranešimų klausysimės anglų kalba, tačiau drąsiai kviečiame savo klausimais dalintis viso renginio metu mūsų susirašinėjimo lauke anglų arba lietuvių kalba, taip kaip jums patogiau. Mano kolegos iš atviros vyriausybės mielai atsakys į šiuos klausimus arba juos įgarsinsime pranešėjams. Maloniai primename, jog siekdami sklandžios transliacijos, besiklausančiuosius prašome išsijungti mikrofonus. And now, before we start our conference, let's begin with the opening talk from the First Deputy Chancellor of the Government of the Republic of Lithuania, Rolandas Kriščiūnas.
Hello, everyone, and I hope you can hear me. Otherwise, I would look at your faces and try to discover if I'm a silent person, just mingling something to myself. But I see that you could hear me quite well, so it's my, I would say, pleasure to address you all, and probably I should not tell you good evening, but because I know there are probably someone from Argentina, as it was announced, so it's probably morning for you. But nevertheless, it just shows, that what a global community the Open Government Partnership is and has become. Lithuania is very pleased to share this wonderful birth of its own, in this community. And of course, it doesn't mean that celebrating 10 years, that open government idea came to Lithuania just 10 years ago. But probably that would be fair to say that maybe 10 years ago, it became something of a strategic goal and more, which was approached by the government more systemic and strategic way, where we just not do because something, we do ad hoc as an idea. It's some things we will do as a mission would tell us, or we would think that it's a proper thing to do, but we probably decided to look at it in a more systemic way and how deep it penetrates in our dealings with the society in general. And of course, also that coincided with the decision that we would like to be a part of the community of like-minded countries which are keen to share and grow together. And they discuss those very important principles of transparency, public involvement, and accountability. And of course, it always makes sense, to share your successes and to build on the other successes. You don't need to invent, so to say, the bicycle when somebody already have invented it years ago. So it's always good and smart way to share your experiences and build on those together. Also, I think if to take into account 10 years, it seems that, it's a long period, but at the same time, it's very short. 10 years also would indicate, that it's a strategic approach, not by just one single government of Lithuania, because we already had a number of governments in those 10 years, but all of them are following the same principles, and the open government in general, the idea of open government haven't lost its significance. There's a change of the government from one to another, and that already speaks loudly about some tradition, I would say, and some very clear approach and choice, on the strategic level. But are we perfect when we speak about the openness and open government in Lithuania? Clearly not, because I don't know what would be this ultimate perfection of open government. Hopefully, it was invented already somewhere among our community. So, and we will discover this perfect example. But I think that it's always will be something we are striving for. And I think the perfection to me, for example, it will be when we will not speak as a responsibility or just a choice, strategic choice. It just will become a habit, something you just naturally do. You don't think about it a lot. You just do it because that's how the things are being done. That's how the thing's supposed to do. That's how it's natural to be done, and so on. And I hope that we will hear also and share the ideas also today, when the community is celebrating those 10 years together with Lithuania in December. But I think I would like to end my short welcome by stressing how important the open government is, and the community of this society, which is meeting today. Some representatives of it are meeting today, because I think when the government is open to its own citizens and involves them in the governance to the maximum, that means, there will be much more peace around us. Those kind of governments are also open to each other, on international arenas. They understand each other keenly, and they are much more eager to involve with other governments. There are less misunderstandings globally, and I think the world in general, however, naive it might sound, it's a better place for us to live in. So that's what I wish. I wish that we will live in this global world, which is, becoming more global every day, even though that it seems sometimes, that we are getting more nationalistic also to some extent. But I know that the globality will not be gone, so we will be global. It's just impossible, to put something in the bottle which was let years and years ago. And that this will be a better place, for us, and the community will grow. Now we count around 80, as I know, but I hope that the community of open governance and open governments will grow, and that will make the world a better place to live for each of us. So that's where I stop, and I wish you a good discussion, and of course, please share. That's where we are, share ideas, share your choices, share your suggestions to each other. Thank you so much, and I wish you a good discussion.
Rolandas Kriščiūnas, the first Deputy Chancellor of the Government of Republic of Lithuania. Thank you very much. And now it's time to start with our presentations, and we start with presentation from the Open Government Partnership Senior Regional Coordinator for Europe, Peter Varga. So, Peter, please, we would like to welcome you.
Labą dieną, and thank you very much indeed for that kind introduction, for the first Deputy Chancellor's spot-on words about what open government is, how long-standing it is, and how important it is. And indeed, the call to action to share some good examples, which I'll try to do in my presentation. But of course, I invite all of you to do the same. So indeed, let me kick off. And sorry, I should start sharing my screen so you can see slides. 1 second. And please, if I can ask you to let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we do.
Excellent. So let me kick off by restating that OGP is built on the 3 fundamental values that the first Deputy Chancellor also mentioned already, that underpin open government, which is transparency, accountability, and participation. So on this very important, week or year even, just a day before International Anti-Corruption Day, and just a couple of days before the 7th Global Summit of the Open Government Partnership, I wanted to bring you a few short stories to show how these values play out or have played out, and also to take a kind of more concrete look at our history. What happened in the past decade, what sort of lessons learned we have, and then, of course, to look forward to the future. So let me first take you to Madrid, where in 2016, the local government, the city government, created a platform, an online tool, which was called the City of Madrid, which was to encourage direct participation in decision-making. So the residents could use this platform, not just to decide who's in charge, but to actually be in charge themselves. So the platform allowed them to weigh in on policy options, to bring their own policy ideas for debate, and to take part in the allocation of the budget. So thanks to this platform and thanks to the decisions that citizens made directly, They actually contributed to the renovation of 11 public squares. They created a fleet of 100% electric buses in Madrid, and they created shelters for battered women, just to name a very few of the examples that they collectively accomplished. So successful was this scheme, in fact, that now the open software, open source software that's underlying the City of Madrid, called Consul, that is now being used in 135 institutions across 35 countries. Then let me take you to the Ukraine, where the public contracting process used to be riddled with corruption. This is a challenge that many of us recognize across our countries. But what happened in the Ukraine was that tech-savvy activists got together with government reformers, and they together brainstormed and created a set of online open contracting tools called Prozoro and Dozor. The platforms have opened up the procurement process to the public, thereby radically improving the transparency and injecting what was needed, much more competition into the system. So over the years, citizens reported tens of thousands of violations. And thanks to the investigation and the resolution of these violations, the government managed to save around 10% of the overall public spending, according to their own figures. And that's a lot of money. So we're talking about billions of euros due to this increased competition and the better transparency. So this reform, paid for itself manifold, I could say. But it didn't just save money, which is often important, of course, for decision makers, but maybe less tangibly, it also created more trust and a level playing field for the private sector. So it built the foundation of a more reliable future in a way. It helped cut the perceptions of corruption in half. It helped increase the participation of small and medium-sized enterprises in public procurement by 50%. And third, my last example for now, I want to take you to Ireland, which was one of the economies that was perhaps one of the hardest hit by the global financial crisis. A crisis that was in part a result of governance failure. Why? Because murky deals were cut in smoky rooms. Lines of responsibility, politically speaking at least, were clear, but lines of influence, who influences, the decision makers, was not. So what the government in Ireland decided, seeing, the ravages of the global financial crisis, was to actually shine a light on this undue influence on policymaking by creating a mandatory and public register that required all the lobbyists and all their meetings to be recorded. So this register went online, it was published, fully searchable, fully accessible to everybody. So it empowered ordinary citizens as well as the media and the law enforcement to prevent the abuses from continuing. And again, maybe more importantly, it showed to the public how decisions are made and how they themselves can also be part of decision making by adding their voice. So as you have seen from these above examples, OGP is all about putting citizens back at the heart of government. Back in 2011, so a decade ago, when OGP was convened by President Obama and created by 8 founding governments and 9 civil society leaders, our partnership was conceived as a response of powerful trends that were at play at that time and still are today, such as the rising influence of emerging economies, shifting geopolitics, new thinking about development and how developed countries can help those still developing, and the quick rise of bottom-up engagement, so to speak, which was facilitated by the rise of technology, social media, etc. Now, since then, in the past 10 years, of course, we have come a long way and the context has changed quite a bit. So fast forward to 2021, this pivotal year when we oftentimes, rightly so, feel that we are, in the middle of or in the eye of a perfect storm. Some of these issues, again, the Deputy Chancellor referred to, but we are experiencing at least 5 global crises which play out simultaneously. A raging global pandemic, profound economic challenges, the alarming climate catastrophe, rising inequality, and last but certainly not least, a retreat of democracy. And of course, new digital challenges such as the power of social media platforms and tech companies, political advertising or automated decision-making, make all our challenges that I just outlined all the more pressing and hard to tackle. But I don't want to sound just gloomy, because in this pivotal year, there's also hope. Together today, we are celebrating champions of reform like yourselves, inside of government and outside, so from civil society, who work together for over a decade now to ensure that governments really get better at serving everybody, all their citizens, and not just a powerful few. And indeed, this past 10 years have been a story of growth. So OGP, from the founding 8 members, has grown to 78 national governments and 76 local governments, who collectively represent more than 2 billion people. As you can see on the slide, those are the countries as it currently stands. And we also have thousands of civil society organizations, domestically and internationally, taking part. So the both sides, government and civil society, collectively making governments more effective and more credible, because they realize that if they open their doors to public input and public oversight, they are actually more credible, effective, and trustworthy. So from day one, government reformers and civil society champions like yourselves have been instrumental to OGP, a fundamental source of energy and innovation, helping to shape and deliver reform. And often, this must be said, against the odds of political, financial, and yes, civic space. Now, how they manage to do so is kind of the holy trinity of OGP, of open government, really: dialogue, action, and accountability. So at the core of OGP, as many of you know, lies a domestic dialogue between government and civil society, who co-create a set of open government commitments that are then logged down in action plans. Now, this dialogue is very, very useful all around, because it helps civil society to raise their voice and bring the needs of the public at large to the table. It also helps governments to gain trust and to gain buy-in for reforms to be implemented. Then high-level political backing gives the process momentum and helps unblock challenges. And then last but not least, the accountability part. So progress of each of our members, both on the ambition and the delivery of the reform commitments, but also on the quality and the depth of the collaboration with civil society. So both of these are independently monitored and then published. And by sharing these lessons learned and progress and challenges, OGP provides the credibility and visibility, as well as the good examples for the reforms, as well as the reformers. So together, there has been 4,600 open government reforms created. It's a staggering number. But even more encouragingly, 2/3 of these have already been implemented. And more than 20% of them have been evaluated and have shown strong, validated early results. And indeed, if I must say so, of course, the glass is always half full or half empty, but on this, anniversary day, if you may, I would like to focus on the half full. So openness could be said to have come a long way in the past 10 years. Within OGP, we are happy to say that the co-creation process has become more participatory and deeper. More and more people and NGOs are getting engaged from a variety of fields. And the commitments themselves have not just improved, but have also become more diverse and even more daring politically. So if you just think of the proliferation of access to information laws, such as within OGP in Brazil, Argentina, or Kenya, for example, or think about open contracting, like the example I shared from the Ukraine, but I could have mentioned Nigeria, and in fact, Lithuania itself working on this very important topic. Or beneficial ownership disclosure, so disclosing who owns companies in the UK, Norway, or neighboring Latvia. Lobby laws in Chile and Ireland, as mentioned already. Or the increasing number of sort of direct democratic tools, such as citizen assemblies, as evidenced in France or Scotland, just to again name a couple. So we're seeing a growing interest in a lot of frontier issues as well, such as climate and energy, such as the transparency of artificial intelligence, such as supervision of tech companies, or open justice, gender inclusion, civic space, just to name a few. Now, of course, a moment of sobriety as well. We have still a long way to go. So OGP's challenge really is at this turning point to be able to turn protest and anger, as we see it, into participation and action. So what we have been doing is to improve standards of co-creation, sharing the lessons learned so far, to make the rules of action planning more flexible so that it suits the budget cycles, the government cycles of our members more. We have expanded our local program. As I mentioned, we have 76 local members now, bringing open government values to the subnational level to ensure ultimately that the fundamental values of, again, transparency, participation, and accountability, they get embedded in the everyday decision-making process. So again, as the first Deputy Chancellor said, they become sort of the modus operandi, the default mode of government, keeping citizen needs really at the heart of it all in laser focus. So let me close, and in closing, I just wanted to show you what I outlined in my presentation in one neat, although admittedly quite complicated slide. Worry not, I won't go over it all. And I believe the presentation will be shared with you, so you can study this later in a closer look if you want. But I just wanted us to focus now on the right-hand side of this slide, on the outcomes. Because we champion reformers like yourselves, imbued with the open government values that I talked about, what we have attained in the past decades, and we continue hopefully to do so in the next ones, is manifold. So on the intermediate sort of outcome level, as you can see at the bottom, I'll start with the domestic one. What we have seen is, as I said, thousands of ambitious reforms that are credibly implemented, and hundreds of action plans that have been co-created that together contribute to triggering institutional change. Internationally, this helps raise the visibility and credibility of open government as a viable form of good governance, and raise the high impact thematic policy areas, which may not have even been there 10 years ago, such as AI, such as beneficial ownership. It raised them to, inspiring international norms that are then followed across the board. And in the whole long run, and I'll stop there, the holy grail of open government really is the systemic and cultural change. That open government really gets institutionalized, hardwired, mainstreamed across all levels of government. And indeed, we will see open government strategies, long-term open government principles that run through the decision-making process day to day. And then also, because of this, citizens, having realized that their voices are heard and that results are, visible, they regain their trust in government, of the people, by the people, for the people. Those are the words of Abraham Lincoln, of course, and indeed it shows that the idea of open government isn't new, it's been around for centuries. So I'll stop there. I want to congratulate all of you in Lithuania and the government office for being steadfast partners, for creating the reforms within Lithuania in the past decades. And I want to continue, or invite you really to continue working on these open government values to obtain these noble goals that we mentioned and some of the good examples. And I wish you a successful next 10 or multiples of 10 years ahead. Thanks for inviting me again, and I look forward to your questions and a conversation. So thank you very much.
Peter Varga, Senior Regional Coordinator for Europe, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for the comprehensive presentation for enlightenment of us. And may I ask just one question? Perhaps we all are curious, how do Baltics, Lithuania looks in European context in the open government partnership scope? If Peter, if you are still with us, we would like to really to hear that. And yeah, can we see? Yeah, you are still with us. So maybe just a quick comment on that. We are here, we are curious about that.
Sure. Again, like half full, half empty. So I'm happy to say I work very closely with the Baltics and the Nordics, and I, of course, have overview across the whole of Europe. That the region, the broader region, has shown a lot of promise. In fact, the Baltics are leading the way in many ways, especially in making open government local. So we have seen very good examples of bringing in, and with some of the municipal reforms that we are experiencing across the Baltics, it has given a good chance to taking open government values to the local level. We have seen, procurement as one of the emerging issues. We have seen open data reform, which has been acknowledged as, very strong in Lithuania. We have seen digital governments, again, emanating largely from the Baltics. So Estonia being one of our founding nations for the digital governments. So there are really good emerging topics that the Baltics are strong in. Of course, there is, more way to go as well. So, for example, directly involving citizens is an area in which we look to the Baltics and broadly speaking, the Nordics to lead the way. And the frontier issues that I mentioned. So, for example, the transparency of artificial intelligence and automated decision making, I think, is ripe, for the Baltics as well to step up and to continue. One last thing that I wanted to mention is that, of course, the experience of your countries, and I'm from Hungary, so to some degree, Central Europe as well, having, although Hungary obviously is not a good example as of late, but having, a somewhat successful, and in your case, a much more successful trajectory, transferring from a closed economy, a closed government, to an open one, is an invaluable source of learning for other parts of the world. So stepping out from focusing domestic reforms, which is very important, I think the Baltic countries can also play a very pivotal role in sharing all that learning with, the Eastern Partnership countries and beyond who are eager to learn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. Thank you once again for participating. And before moving on, I have to announce that once again, we would like to kindly ask you to provide your questions in our chat box in Lithuanian and in English. It's up to you. And we just hear that we have some little issues with technical connections from our foreign ministry representative. So we will move on to our guests from Argentina, and then we will come back to our Foreign Affairs Ministry. And now I just would like to say that Open Government Partnership is a worldwide international platform. And to demonstrate that, today we have our partners from Argentina, and let me introduce Carolina Cornejo, Argentina's Open Government Partnership Director of Open Government at the Office of Chief of Cabinets of Ministers. So, Carolina, we would like to hear your experience, your insights about your ideas, your experience, and your practices.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. I think it's really interesting to have the opportunity to exchange experiences between countries, in fact, very different countries in very far away. So it's really nice initiative that in the frame of the OGP 10th anniversary, you set the floor for this conversation. I'm going to share a presentation. Let me know if you can see it, so that I can drive you through the path of open government and Argentina's engagement in the OGP. As we talked some time ago, we have a very similar timeline. To begin, just let me tell you that Argentina joined the OGP in 2012 and has already developed 4 action plans. It's currently implemented. We are currently implementing the 4th one. But what is interesting about this is that the developments of open government are also linked to legal developments in Argentina, legal instruments that opened the path for these open government reforms. For instance, the law on personal data, a decree on public hearings, public consultations, access to information in the frame of the executive branch, and more recently, the law on access to information of 2016, together with the open data decree. And I mention this because these legal instruments also impact Argentina's commitments in the OGP and in the action plans. For instance, you can see that when we joined the OGP, and as many countries I think many countries had the similar experience, that first action plans had to do a lot with electronic government or with commitments based or implemented by the lead agency in the OGP. In this case, it was the Cabinet Office. But as we moved into new action plans, different conversations started to take place, and this had to do a lot with open government developments all over the world, and topics that were starting to be addressed together with feedback from the independent review mechanism from the OGP. As you know, the action plans are assessed by this IRM, just as Peter noted. And there are different recommendations that can also help develop the next action plan. So in Argentina, every action plan took some key takeaways and key lessons from the previous developments. So you will see, for instance, that in the case of the third action plan, 44 commitments were included. That's a lot, but that had also to do with the setting at that time. And I'm going to drive you through this. For instance, the third action plan. What we had in the frame of third action plan was different conversations. And I mentioned the third action plan because it was the first time that Argentina embarked on an open state approach by including commitments from the different branches, the executive, the legislative, the judicial branch, together with oversight institutions. And at the same time, it was the first time that Argentina engaged local governments in developing commitments. And I think this is a trend not only in Argentina, but also globally, and especially in as you know, you have this OGP local program, but as the local strategy states, there are other ways of engaging local governments, especially in federal countries like Argentina. So some key areas that were addressed in the third action plan that I think that have to do a lot with what happens in the world is open budgeting or equal rights, women in science, open contracting, climate change, as Peter noted, there's this climate crisis. So a way of addressing this crisis has to do with fostering inclusion and open government in these reforms. There were also commitments by the parliament, by the judicial branch. There were commitments also regarding gender. That was a key approach that was taken in the frame of the third action plan, including commitments to address gender-based violence and address inequalities and the gender gap. And then we moved into the fourth action plan. And what is interesting about this move is that we needed to narrow down the quantity of commitments. We came from a plan of 44 commitments to a one with 18 commitments. And the interesting thing about this plan was that it was co-created in 2019, but it was implemented after government transition. And I mention this because there are key learnings from transition. As this was discussed previously, open government is no party flag. So it is important that global commitments help ensure continuity of open government policies. So participation in the OGP has been driven by different administrations in Argentina. And I think that there are many lessons to address from that kind of experience. But in the case of Argentina, I just want to point out that even though the plan was co-created by a previous administration and it is now implemented by a different administration. And some key lessons from that have to do with, first, ensuring that commitments have a very strong support from civil society and address citizen needs. So a governments, and this happens a lot to us, we want to include commitments based on what we do, on the reforms we are pushing in order to gain more high-level political support, to gain visibility. But successful and impactful reforms come from citizen needs and with civil society support. So this action plan was very inclusive in the sense of including commitments that responded, that addressed citizen needs, civil society demands, and that were also national priorities, not just priorities of an administration. For instance, extractive industries. Argentina in 2019 was joining the EITI, the Transparency in Extractive Industries initiative. So we knew that there was going to be a continuity in that. So including a commitment based on transparency in extractive industries really made sense. Another kind of commitment it was really important. It had to do with gender-based violence and on federalizing a law in Argentina that entailed gender training for public officials in different branches of the state. So we wanted to take that to the federal level, to the local level. So the issues regarding gender and gender gaps were important for the previous administration, are important for the current administration, because they are based on women needs, on what happens in the streets. So I think that a key learning based on how to ensure that an open government plan is implemented is taking in what happens in the streets and in the public debate. So these are just some examples. We also have commitments on water and sanitation, which was, for instance, a topic that was suggested by civil society in the third action plan, but there was no support from the government agency to include a commitment. So we brought it into a fourth action plan. So I'm sharing this because I think it's important to never let go of what matters to stakeholders. So just think of when the context is prepared, or when officials are prepared, or when there is political support to take in specific commitments. So this is kind of an overview of the plan. I just want to share one more thing, which has to do with the National Open Government Roundtable. This is our multi-stakeholder forum. This is a space where we institutionalize dialogue and articulation between 4 government agencies and 4 civil society organizations. So this was created in the frame of the OGP, of Argentina's participation in the OGP. So its mandate is to lead the process around co-creating and implementing action plans, but it's also a space to promote and disseminate the principles of transparency, participation, and accountability. So we don't just discuss commitments. We discuss, for instance, what can we do in the frame of the pandemic? What data should be opened? Which is the kind of information that needs to be shared? So these spaces are critical. And just some reflections on the past. Building these kinds of spaces, it's not easy. And in the case of Argentina, we had this informal task force where government and civil society met with each other to discuss potential commitments, but it was kind of informal. Anyone could join, but there were no clear rules for decision making. So as in 2016, the OGP started to suggest creating a multi-stakeholder forum and provided some guidelines to do that. As we approached the development of the third action plan, we started piloting a kind of MSF, the National Open Government Roundtable, but based on what we learned during that year, sitting with 4 civil society organizations that were chosen by a network of CSOs, and what we learned from 4 government agencies that were sitting at the table, we started drafting the resolution and the guidelines of the roundtable, being part of it. So we institutionalized it through a resolution at the end of 2018. And I share you this because I think that an interesting experience is to try how spaces really work in practice before issuing resolutions or decrees. And I think that really helps us, in fact, drive transition. Because in 2019, in December, 2 years ago, when we faced transition after elections, the MSF was critical to ensure that the fourth action plan was going to be implemented and that Argentina was still being a part of the OGP steering committee. So some challenges ahead. I think that this may happen in many countries, is that make sure that open government really connects with citizens. Sometimes we kind of start speaking with the same stakeholders, but it's kind of difficult to make sure that inclusive processes are the ones that really get back to citizens and improve their lives. So I think that there's also some need to remind ourselves that open government should deliver to citizens. We need also more informants of open government reforms. This is not just about commitments in a 2-year action plan. This is about whole of government reforms. And I think that in Argentina, we need more enforcement of those kinds of reforms. We need to make sure that open government is cross-cutting to different policies and especially to different policy gaps. So to tool to do this, I believe it's trying to anchor open government in sectoral policies, just as we mentioned before, taking commitments on climate change, taking commitments, for instance, in public infrastructure, taking commitments in sexual education. So different policy areas where we can make sure that we promote transparency participation. Also, we need to get buy-in, and this is something that government officials face every day when we speak about open government. This is not sometimes a topic that is on top of the agenda, and we still need to find the stories like the ones that were shared by Peter to identify tangible benefits of the open government approach that deliver to citizens. So we still need to drive to see the narrative and the results behind that. And this is also why we still need to measure and evaluate open government initiatives. The IRM is an excellent methodology and an excellent feature to assess action plans, but we need to go a step further and analyze and measure the results of the policies we undertake at the national level. And some lessons learned, just to close my speech and start discussing more with you. I think it's critical to develop a narrative and approach to open government, and this has been really useful in the frame of government transition. Just as I mentioned, we need to make sure that government officials get ownership of the initiatives. And we need to make sure that open government can be the narrative to deliver that agenda. We need also to foster an inclusive open government ecosystem. And I speak of ecosystem because this is not just about civil society organizations and government areas. It's about building connections, engaging an open state approach. For instance, engaging universities, engaging the private sector, engaging citizens directly, engaging social movements. And I think that so far we are working on that, but we need to go a step further. A critical lesson also is to invest in meaningful participatory design and implementation of commitments, and especially the idea of meaningful, authentic. This is not just a decision that is taken behind closed doors and that we need to play it as it has been something participatory. We need to invest time in authentic participation, and that takes months, even years, but this is, I think it's a worth investment. Also, we need to work, and we've been working in collaboration with other sectors and government areas at different levels, and this is what we've seen in the OGP action plans. Like every year, we start engaging different areas, like for instance, the open justice movement, by engaging the Supreme Court, by engaging Parliament. This is important. And by working in collaboration, we need to feature champions. This is something critical. I feel that it's just, I think this is something that Peter mentioned before, like the OGP working in reformers. And if we want to make sure that we take open government to the next level, we need to make sure that we are not just the POCs or the open government directors pushing this agenda, but we make sure that we have champions in different ministries, in different governments, and this is a movement of people and for the people. So I would say that having and building partnerships and forging alliances with colleagues is critical. Also, never forget to build consensus and listen to needs and testimonies. This is about being really inclusive. This matters really. To identify incentives, sometimes the incentives will not be the same for an agency, for civil society, but we need to find what can open government deliver to each stakeholder. And finally, it's critical to be flexible. Just as we have this idea of the fourth action plan being co-created by one administration and then implemented by the second one, we can be flexible in that adaptation. And I think it's important that in every policy, we are flexible enough to include new developments, but also to understand that we can be flexible and build consensus at the same time. So that would be my final point on that, but just looking forward to listening to you and to discussing this. And I hope that the Argentina experience really can enrich in some way the dialogue and the policies and the path that has been walked by Lithuania. Thanks.
Carolina Cornejo, Argentina's Open Government Partnership Director. And indeed, we are so far in terms of kilometers or miles, yet so close when it comes to our values, when it comes to things that we share. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for your experience. And one question, or maybe even more, but let's start with what you have learned from Open Government Partnership partner states or countries, what you have heard, what kind of good practices you have learned for others.
Well, we've learned a lot from others. In fact, when we decided to embark on, for instance, an open government strategy, like a whole of government approach to develop a strategy, a 4-year strategy, we spoke with the POC, for instance, of Colombia. So those are the kinds of, or for instance, when decided to take in commitments on open state, like how to engage public institutions from different branches, we looked a lot into experiences of Latin America, because that was a movement that was really moving forward in the region. And one more thing that we included, or where we fostered dialogues when developing the National Open Government Roundtable, we looked at different experiences from the region, and we looked at their guidelines to co-create or to create this MSF, and that really helped us. Like, it's really important that we speak with others, not just search for good experiences or good practices online. The testimony of reformers is critical, and I think that we found a lot of that in Latin America and also with other countries, and especially through the OGP Steering Committee. Argentina has been part over the past 3 years of the Steering Committee, and that's a space that I would encourage you to join, because it's critical also to get support for domestic reforms and to learn from others. So hope you can think it over too.
Thank you, Carolina, very much for your answer. And I'm raising my hand because I would also like to ask a question, because I was listening to your presentation, and actually I was prepared before the question, but you already answered it regarding the openness of creation of the plans and so on. But I still have this always unanswerable question in my mind, because when we talk about open government, we usually talk about the government side of the government. But when it comes to the other side, the citizens, the people and stakeholders, in your experience, is it easy to engage them into creation of the plans, into the whole movement of OGP? And maybe you have any suggestions how to do it better? So, thank you.
Well, that's interesting, because that's a challenge we have, but there have been good or interesting cases. For instance, in when we find a topic or a policy issue that is really burning on the agenda, just for instance, gender violence or sexual education, I think that those are the areas where we can really connect with citizens. So for instance, in 2019, we had this discussion around including a commitment on sexual education, because there's a bill on sexual education in Argentina that dates back to, I think, like 15 years ago. But the problem was that there was no evidence that it was being implemented at the federal level, in provinces, in schools, in different municipalities. So civil society organizations wanted or pushed for a commitment on open data and disaggregated data on how sexual education was being imparted at the federal level. And by that time, it was really difficult to include the commitment by the administration, because education is like a local, education is imparted by local governments. I mean, the national government doesn't have all the information unless provinces report it to the national government. So in 2020, as the new government took office, and a government or an administration with a lot of focus on engaging youth, engaging women, so we found a space to bring back that conversation, and we suggested, and we told them, well, you know, there's this commitment that was not undertaken by the previous administration, but there was already a participatory process in place. So do you want, is this aligned to your priorities for the next 4 years? What do you think about sexual education? Just don't think that you need to open data on how sexual education is being implemented. Think it big. What do you want to do? And they said, we want to engage students, we want to engage teachers, we want to engage local governments. So, okay, well, let's think of an observatory engaging all stakeholders. And I think that that was the way to engage citizens. Citizens meaning students in this case. So when you find like the policy gap, when you find people who really want to speak out, like students, when we had this roundtable in 2019, there were students taking part. And they said, in my school, this is not happening. And for government officials, it was more difficult to tell students, okay, I can't take this commitment. So that was explained in a closed room with civil society. But if we want to engage citizens, we need to find those burning issues in the agenda and what really matters to citizens. Not just to speak to citizens, I mean, in like addressing them all, but to find what matters to specific citizens. So I think that that's an interesting story, and I would encourage you to try to see what's burning in the Lithuania agenda.
Thank you once again, and it's our honor and privilege to have you today with us. Thank you, Karolina, so much from your experience and from your insights and for your time. It's really nice to cooperate. And moving on, open government partnership values are based on democracy values. That's why our next speaker will review democracy and its challenges in our days. And I would like to invite Ambassador for United Nations International Organization and Human Rights Department of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Skaistė Nulienė.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me well? I had troubles with technical issues actually connecting to the conference, and this is why I'm really anxious whether everything is all right now. Well, congratulations on the occasion of 10 years anniversary of the Open Government Partnership, and thank you for inviting me to address you during this meaningful celebration. Well, I'm convinced that we all agree that transparent, accountable, and inclusive governments that are close to their people and continuously serve for the benefit of the society are an integral part of a democratic political system. And democracy is the foundation of our way of life, but having enjoyed it for the past 30 years, we very well know that it cannot be taken for granted. We have to nurture and take care of it every day. So while working to improve our democracies at home, we should also be aware of the wider context and take into account global political tendencies over the past decades. Last month, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Vilnius organized an international forum, Future of Democracy, and the subtitle was Defending Against Authoritarianism. So this forum was attended by a number of ministers of foreign affairs, members of parliaments, media, political activists, non-governmental organizations, civic society leaders. And while recognizing that democracy is under threat globally, the participants aimed at presenting concrete recommendations on how to strengthen and promote democracy, which is really being attacked by autocracies in recent decades. We are really experiencing the onslaught on the free world. And this is why this conference was organized, and this is why I would like to touch upon a few recommendations which found their way to the final document of the forum. And of course, these recommendations relate also to the policy areas of open government partnership. So safeguarding democracy in the face of contracting democratic space and the advancement of authoritarianism in the world is a major responsibility. In this context, we cannot underestimate the importance of building our society's resilience against hybrid attacks, targeted dissemination of propaganda, fake news, and other means of tenacious influence employed by authoritarian superpowers. Building resilience of a democratic society requires daily effort by the state and local governments to perform their duties in transparent, accountable, and inclusive manner, and gaining sincere trust and support of their people. So the forum concluded that it is essential to become better democracies, upgrade democratic mechanisms, strictly follow the rule of law, rigorously protect human rights, and promote deeper public understanding of the value of democracy, recognizing that only through grassroots activities can citizens really gain trust in democratic system and resolve to stand firm to defend it. Hence, it is imperative for the democratic governments, and I will enumerate now, to act in accordance with the best democratic practices, to seek inclusive public participation and decrease polarization of the society, support new and already existing mechanisms for promotion of transparency by allowing easy access to government information, advance protection of civil society, including NGOs and media in their efforts to hold governments accountable, provide true and objective information to the public, raise public awareness and commitment to democratic values through increasing media literacy and anti-propaganda training, and of course combat any manifestation of corruption, as it compromises the essential of democratic governments. Well, speaking of corruption, I think we all agree that it is one of the factors that severely damages democracy. And the forum recognized that corruption does not only corrode democracy internally, but also is one of the principal channels through which authoritarian regimes acquire levers of influence within democratic societies and undermine proper decision-making process. Thus, corruption must be fought not only inside a state, but also with a perspective of possible foreign interference. The governments can step up fight against corruption, for example, by ensuring that authoritarian actors' wealth and its origin could not be disguised through shell companies, trusts, other investment vehicles, or by enhancing transparency measures on real estate ownership, which will curtail the ability of illicit actors to hide their wealth in real estate, or by passing and implementing robust bans on foreign bribery, or by increasing transparency, participation, and competition in public procurement and foreign assistance, including by developing guidelines for emergency procurement and foreign assistance. Well, of course, this list of measures is really not complete. It rather defines the most urgent actions needed in order to fight corruption, threatening the validity and integrity of democracy. My account of this forum of democracy is in no way exhaustive. The state of play in today's world is rather complicated, as the authorities deliberately attack our way of life and seek to undermine democratic political resolve. Democracy is being threatened in many intricate ways, and we need to unite our actions for the defense of our values. International solidarity of democratic governments is of paramount importance here, and I'm sure that the Open Government Partnership has a very important role to play in implementing the organization's policy at home, as well as nurturing a robust and beneficial international dialogue among the like-minded governments. So, wish you a very successful and productive work in this field. Thank you.
Skaiste Nulienė, Ambassador for United Nations International Organization and Human Rights Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for your insights. And I just have to announce the question from those who are following us in social media. We would like to ask, in the context of open government, how we as Lithuania, as a country, could inspire other countries, for instance, in the terms of democratic reforms or other democratic processes. So how could we, or if we could that?
Well, I absolutely think that, yes, we can inspire others. Just remember ourselves a few decades ago. I believe while fighting for our independence and building democracy in our state, we were looking up to other developed democratic countries and following the example. So I believe that many developing countries, many democracy-aspiring countries, they have to have someone to look up on. So a good example, I believe, is really a very powerful tool.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's really important not only to learn from good examples, but also to be that example which others would like to follow, which would be nice for others to have together by their sides. And now I would like to pass the microphone to my colleague Ieva Kimontaitė. You already seen her with questions, and also she has a small, tiny exercise for all of us before we will finish.
Well, I'm turning in Lithuanian now because I have a quick question for our viewers at the moment. So I would like all of you to ask a question. What do you think, what you as a person and sorry, I'm turning to Lithuanian. Taigi, mėly dalyviai, aš norėčiau užduoti vieną nedidelį klausimą jums. Mes taip įsikvėpėm šito susitikimo metu ir išgirdot įvairių pavyzdžių ir Lietuvos atvejų ir tarptautinių įvairių pavyzdžių. Ir norėčiau tiesiog jūsų paklausti, ko jūsų nuomonė reikėtų, kad būtume atviri? Ar kaip valstybė, įstaigų, darbuotojai ir piliečiai ir apskritai? Tai pakviesčiau nueiti į menti.com internetinį puslapį ir jame įrašyti numeriuką 60184300 ir tenais įrašyti savo atsakymą vienu žodžiu, kogi mums reikia, kad būtumėm atviri. Tai tokia, arba galite paspausti nuorodą, va čia įmečiau į mūsų susitikimų pokalbių langą ir tiesiog pasvarstykim, kasgi jūsų nuomonė reikėtų, nes mes turim čia dalyvių iš įvairių sektorių ir kiekvienas vis kažką iš savo pusės gali atsinešti. Tai kviečiu kelias minutės pasižiūrėti ir atsakyti į tą klausimą ir pasižiūrėsim, kokiegi rezultatai. I will translate for our colleagues the question. So I simply asked the question because we got an inspiration from all of the sides of the world, how we can be more open. So I'm asking from the point of view of our viewers, what do they think, what is needed to achieve openness or to be open as a citizen, as a country, or as a public sector worker? And I asked to answer them with only one word, so we will see if we have any answers. Yeah, we already have some answers. Taigi jau po truputėlį atsakymų atsiranda, tai aš galiu pasidalinti ekranu, irgi parodysiu, kaip čia viskas atrodo. Taip. Tai smagu matyti, kad apgalvojate iš tikrųjų, nes atvirumą mes suprantame iš tikrųjų visi skirtingai ir taip. Štai, ko reikia? Tai reikia motyvacijos, noro, pasitikėjimo vieni kitais. Labai svarbus dalykai, laisvės kurti. Tai smagu, nuoširdumo smagu matyti, kad mūsų atsakymai yra tokie patys atviri ir susiję su mumis pačiais. I will translate for colleagues in English. So basically all of the answers are about trusting each other, motivation, willingness to do, courageousness to do some new things and experience some new things. Also to be heard, to have the freedom to create. So I'm really happy to see that, this is not about the money or something material, but this is more about all of us. So ačiū visiems labai už jūsų atsakymus ir perduodu žodį Giedrei.
Dėkui, Ieva. Taip, turim Aidą, turim žodžius, kurie įkvepia. And for the last our insights, for the last thing what we would like to say that thank you, dear guest, for wonderful presentation, for discussion, for ideas, for joining us. It was really great to have you. It was really great to be in a one big network. It's really great that you can invite you to inspire us, and it's really nice that you are still searching from inspiration and good practices. And just all the same thing in Lithuanian. Ačiū dalyvavusiems, ačiū klaususiems, ačiū klaususiems, gražaus vakaro, įkvėpimo ir labai malonu visiems buvusiems su mumis. Dėkui, thank you so much.